Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this morning's webinar with Sara Hey from Bob Clements International. It's being brought to you free, courtesy of the good folks at YANMAR. I am Michael Ellis. I'm the publisher of Rural Lifestyle Dealer Magazine, and today Sara is going to be sharing some strategies for resolving personality conflicts in your business, whether it's employee-related or customer-related. Now, Sara is the VP of Operations and Development at Bob Clements International, and she's going to explain why some people drive you crazy and what you can do about it. Before I turn everything over to Sara, we just have a couple of housekeeping items. On your screen, you're going to notice a white arrow in an orange box. You can click on the arrow and choose question to open up a question field, and that's going to allow you to submit a question at any point during the presentation. Time permitting, we're going to look to answer as many as we possibly can at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to all of them, we will send them home with Sara so she can answer them. And then we're going to post those up on the website along with the archived replay of the webinar. And you can go back and check it out as you like. Now, if for any reason your internet connection or our connection fails at some point and it looks like the webinar has been interrupted, just go back to the email you received telling you how to join, and you can re-enter that way. Now with that, we should be ready to go. Thanks again for joining us, and I will turn everything over to Sara. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Michael. I am just so excited to be here with everyone this morning. And I am just always so thankful for our relationship with you at Rural Lifestyle Dealer Magazine. It's been a wonderful partnership over the years. So my name is Sara Hey, as Michael said, and I am over our operations and development at Bob Clements International. I have been full-time with the company for about 5 years now. And over those 5 years, I have had the privilege of being able to work just about every single role in our company, right? I started as a inside salesperson with our company, and I am where I am today. So the interesting thing is we are a family business like many of you are. And being a family business gives us some really unique issues, but I am Bob's oldest daughter. So one of the things I often joke about is I'll claim him as my dad if he's behaving. And so he is actually not in the state today, so I have no idea if he's behaving or not. So I will claim him as my dad today. But one of the questions I get asked the most about working with my dad is the question, what was it like growing up with Bob as your dad? And typically, like, I just laugh that question off and say, well, what was it like to grow up with your dad, right? But I realized something over the years. Growing up with my dad, being Bob, he has taught me a lot of things, but two of them, one is work ethic. He is an incredibly hard worker, and I have learned that and learned so much from him in that. But second, he is a pro when it comes to dealing with difficult situations and personality types and people who just drive him crazy, right? And we all have those people. You know, one of the things that as we talk to dealers and as we're in dealerships all across the country, we hear is it would be so easy if people weren't involved in the business, right? I'm sure you've all been there. You think, you know what, if I didn't have to deal with employees, with customers, with anybody, and I could just do what I wanted to do, this would be easy. So, but the fact of the matter is that's not actually a possibility. And so we, as business owners and managers and employees, have to understand how to deal with conflicting personalities and difficult people and what we're supposed to do with that. So the first thing we want to talk about is, why do people drive you crazy? I bet if I were to ask you, do you have anybody in your life who's driving you crazy right now? Your hand would probably go up, right? Everybody has somebody who knows how to push their buttons and seems to push them often. And you know, if you were to Google why do people drive you crazy or how to deal with people who drive you crazy, you get this huge list. You have everyone from Oprah to the Bible to Dr. Phil. Like, everybody has strategies on how to cope with people who drive you crazy. But you know, I was standing in my office yesterday talking to Jim, who was one of our senior advisors at our company, and we were joking back and forth about this, and he said this, and so Jim Dom made it into my PowerPoint today, but he said, if there isn't anyone driving you crazy, you're probably driving everyone else crazy. and I think that's so funny, but it's also so true. We have dealers that we work with across the country, and we have time and time again, we hear employees say, I don't think the owner understands how they're driving everybody else crazy. So it goes both ways. This is just like a little public service announcement. You are probably driving other people crazy just like they're driving you crazy. So how do we deal with this? How do we deal with the crazy in our life? Because it's going to be there whether we admit it or not. So I think there are 3 different things that we have to keep in mind as we are interacting with people. And 3 things that when you're done with interacting with people who are different than yourself, it makes you go, oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted from interacting with them. So here are the 3 things that I think play into you having someone who drives you crazy. The first thing is people drive you crazy because people learn and receive information differently than you do. All right, so there are 3 learning styles. We have our visual learning style, which is a see to learn, right? They need to see something to learn how to do it. We have an auditory learning style. They need to hear what to learn. And then there's the kinesthetic learning style, and they need to move to learn. There's a few different ways to understand this and look at this. But I think one of the ways that is most applicable is when you are talking with someone, they're going to be saying words and doing things with their body, which are going to indicate which one of these learning styles they are. A visual is going to talk fast. They're going to use their hands. They're going to move them from side to side. They're going to say pictures are worth 1,000 words. Do you see what I'm talking about? Come look at it from this perspective, right? Words that indicate sight. And we're moving our hands, and when you talk to them and they think, their eyes go up toward their head, towards their brain. Their eyes should be in their head. We'll just make that clear. But that is how you would recognize someone who is visual. If you're talking to someone who's auditory and they need to hear things to learn, you're going to hear words like, well, if you listen, think about it this way, if you hear it this way, right? They're using words that indicate an auditory learning style. Their eyes are going to go towards one of their ears. If their eyes split and go towards the other ears, that is a whole different issue, and you should probably seek medical attention. But their hands are going to be close to their body. They're going to still be moving some, right? They're still trying to explain this picture, but it's going to be using auditory words. The last learning style, the kinesthetic learning style. They need to move to learn. They're going to be doing things like, well, let me just try it, right? If you were to say, I want you to remember this phone number, a kinesthetic, someone who's a kinesthetic learning style, would sit there and punch out the number on the phone as you told them. So like what, 8675309, like they'd be pushing that out on the phone as they were listening to that music, because that is how they learn and process information. The other way to see this, and we see this so often in salespeople, like you always try to convey information the way that you learn. And people get so frustrated because they say, what are you doing? This is not how I learn and process information. So in salespeople, when you hand somebody a brochure, this is a telltale sign of if they're a visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learner. You hand a visual person a brochure. What will they do? They'll take the brochure, they'll skim it over, and then they'll look at the product that you're showing them, right? They've looked and processed that information, but they also need to look and see it. And auditory, you'll hand them the brochure and it won't even faze them. They won't even look at the brochure. You'll be like, I just handed you this brochure. We spent so much time and money on it. Why are you not utilizing it? Because an auditory person will say, well, just tell me about it. Tell me about the specifics of it. They don't want to process this by seeing it, but they want to process by hearing. Third, the kinesthetic. What will happen when you hand a kinesthetic a brochure? They will take the brochure and you will notice that in the next few minutes, they may glance at it just briefly, but they will start rolling it into their hands, and it will be a circle like a baton by the time you're done, because they're moving to learn. They just want to get on the piece of equipment or the product that you're showing them and try it for themselves. So we communicate with information when we try to give information to people in the way that we learn. But if you have been on the opposite end of this and you say, I know we just spent 30 minutes talking, but I have no idea what you just said to me, that is probably because your learning style is different. As a side note, with technicians, most technicians are kinesthetic learners, right? That's why they like to be in the shop, working on equipment, getting their hands on it. I had a conversation just a few weeks ago while we were on the road with someone who's over developing training for a company we work with. And in this conversation, he said, you know, Sarah, I have given all of this written material to all of these technicians, and they just keep saying, we want stuff on iPads, we want stuff that we can do. And he said, but I already worked and gave all this information to them. I don't understand where the disconnect is. I can almost guarantee you this is the disconnect, right? Our technicians are kinesthetic, and that's what they're needing to move to learn. And I can almost guarantee you this man was a visual learner because he wanted to see to learn. It's important that we understand how we communicate and talk with people, and how we learn and receive information is not the same as others, and we have to adapt ourselves to give them the information. So that's the first reason why people just drive us crazy. Next, personality. So we love the DISC profile in our office. You've probably heard me talk about this before, but we have this thing we call the DISC. It's D-I-S-C. There are 4 different personality types, and these are just indicators of someone's behavior, right? If in any situation, and especially under pressure, this is what this person's behavior will look like. So we have our D, which is our driver personality type. They are somebody who wants it done now, right? There is not a whole lot of questions. A lot of times I joke that when someone makes a decision and they're a driver personality, it's like an atomic bomb went off, right? And they say, damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead. They don't want to deal with the shrapnel. They just made a decision and they said, we will deal with the consequences later. That's the driver personality. Our influencer personality is someone who would use a phrase commonly, let me explain. I know this what didn't get done the way you wanted me to, but let me explain, right? This person is the life of the party. They know everybody and everyone knows them. Everybody loves it when they walk in a room because they just light the room up. All right, the third one, the S or the steady, wants to know the plan. They need to have a long-range plan that tells them what the steps are step by step, right? So that's our steady personality. Fourth, we have a compliant personality. And a question that you would probably hear them ask in your dealership is, do you have documentation, right? This is a person who is always wanting to know and think through every single possibility of a scenario that could go wrong so that they can be prepared for it. So you may hear a question like, do you have documentation come out of the mouth of someone who is a compliant personality? None of these are, all of these are neutral. There's not like a good personality and a bad personality. These are just simply behaviors and give us clues into a person and why they are the way they are. So what does it look like for a customer to have each of these different behavior types? Let's talk about it if they were to walk up to your parts counter. A driver would come into your dealership with no smile on their face. They would walk straight with purpose and passion to the parts department, and they would say, here's the part I need. There wouldn't be a whole lot of small talk, but they would want their part, and they would want to be in and out as efficiently and effectively as possible with the right part. That's a driver at your parts counter. Someone who's the influencer or a high I personality would walk into your dealership with a big smile on their face. You would know they're there. Everybody would love it. They know the name of every single person at the parts counter and probably know about their dogs too, right? They know everything about these people. They're fun to be around. So when they walk up to your parts counter, this is not going to be a quick situation or exchange. They're going to want to catch up and understand what's going on in everybody's life and then hopefully walk out with the part. But what they're really interested in this situation is the interaction. A steady is going to walk into your dealership with a small smile on their face. They're not going to be walking as forceful as the driver, but there's not going to be a whole lot of the gregarious smiles and interactions like the influencer. This person comes across as a very nice, friendly person. But so they're going to walk up to your parts counter, and this is the person who's going to want to understand what the plan is, and step by step how they're going to be able to maintain their piece of equipment to the fullest capacity. So that's the steady. A compliant person, they're going to walk in with a very little smile on their face. They're going to come up and they're going to say, all right, here is all of my documentation from my equipment that I bought from you. Here's the serial number. They're going to have, you know what, in a lot of ways, this is probably your dream person at your parts counter because they have all of the information that you're going to need, right? And they have it in their folder, probably manila envelope. We've all had these people, right? And they open it and they say, okay, here's my piece of equipment. Here's the date I bought it. And you go, holy smokes, I don't actually need all of this information, but here it is. So those are our different customer types. Now, this is where it gets interesting. As you have your employees interacting with these customers, sometimes there's conflict because if you have someone at your parts counter who is an influencer or a high I and wants to visit, and they have somebody who comes in who is a high S personality and wants to know what the plan is, there's going to be conflict. It goes with you and your employees too, right? Like if someone is a driver and wants it done now, they don't care about the details. And that is going to be a situation with the compliant personality because they want to know all the details and think through all of the possible outcomes before something is decided. So there's conflict, right? So we have to understand what it looks like for each of these personality types to interact together and to get along, and how we do this with our customers and our employees. All right, so what does it look like an employee with each of these? I mean, we kind of just covered that, but a driver. So if you have a driver in your business, a lot of times as we do these conversations, we find that a lot of the owners and general managers are drivers, right? You want to get it done now. You're focused on the end goal, right? An influencer, a lot of times a salesperson is an influencer. They want to visit with the customers, have these relationships. A steady, a lot of times, the most people we have who are steady and compliant, both, are people who are technicians, right? And we would hope that the person who's doing parts inventory counts for us is a compliant personality. We want to know the numbers are right, and we probably wouldn't want a driver doing parts inventory counts, right? Because we don't want just a guess, and probably most of the time with a driver, you're just gonna get a guess, an estimate, and that's not what we're looking for parts inventory counts. So each of these have a special place, but as you're interacting with other people who are not the same personality as you, you will feel exhausted when you're done with them, absolutely exhausted. And so it's important to understand that we are different and that we have to figure out how we interact together. All right, the third part of this is our motivators. So we've got first our learning styles, then we talked about our personalities or our behaviors, and then third, what motivates one person may not work effectively for another person, right? You know, everybody, as we design compensation plans for people, I think this is one of the easiest ways to understand this. You may have two people who have exactly the same personality style. In our office, Natalie, who does our accounting and our HR, and I have exactly the same personality style. That is not a common thing, but that is what we have, right? But the thing that makes us different as human beings is the fact that we have very different motivators. And what motivates Natalie is not what motivates me, right? So as we're designing compensation programs, or as we're understanding how do we keep our employees motivated, we have to understand that motivators are different. And so you may say, okay, I'm designing a compensation program and I have given them this extra bonus and I just don't understand why they're not excited. Why are they not excited and putting out more work, right? Well, everybody's gonna take the check to the bank and cash it. Like, that's not a question, but that may not be their biggest motivator. You know, maybe it's an extra half a day off to spend with their family. Maybe their motivator is the ability to learn, right? They want to be learning new things. So understanding what motivates one person is vitally important in this conversation, because you can sit here and pull your hair out and be like, why are my people not motivated? Maybe you're just not using the right motivator. And this goes right for your customers too, right? What motivates one customer, let's say price, they're very money motivated and they want to make sure they get the best price, may not motivate another person, which is to get them back on their piece of equipment functioning quickly, because they want to be out spending time with their family and enjoying their equipment from you. So that's the third part of this. So first, learning style. Second, your personality or your behaviors. And then your third one is our motivators. And I think when you put those together, if you have someone who is so vitally different than you, it's one of those things where you get them dealing with them and you are just exhausted. I'm sure all of you have been there. I have been there before, when you go, holy smokes, I know I just spent 30 minutes with you and it's not that long of a time, but you have exhausted me. I need to be done for the rest of the day. Well, maybe not, but you get what I'm saying. Okay, so when you have someone who is so vitally different than you, one of three things are going to happen. We have either the fight response, the flight response, or the freeze response. Now, I know most of you are probably familiar with the fright or the flight response, but we have this third response that has just come up, I don't know, in the last 10, 15 years or so, called the freeze response. And how this came about was in the 90s, when we had the Olympics in Atlanta, there was a bombing that took place there. And as psychologists looked at that footage, they found out that there was this third response where people, so this is about 10% of the population that this happens to. So a large part of the population ran, right? A large part fought. They were looking for ways to help and be proactive. But this third group just froze. Like, they literally didn't even know what to do next because of this situation. Their body could not even function. Again, we were having a conversation on Monday, and this is so ingrained into us as a culture now, especially with everything going on, that it's just what you're told to do. We had one of our advisors in an airport a few weeks ago, and they said that there was an active shooter in the airport. It turned out that this wasn't false. This was false, and it was a terrible miscommunication, clearly, but they came on the speaker of the airport and said there's an active shooter. You either need to fight or you need to hide, right? Like, this is so ingrained into us that we, in our culture now, that is the information that they're giving people. So we have to understand our responses and have a way to cope with each of these. So if you get in a situation with a customer, an employee, or anyone who is causing this stress in your life, you need to understand what your response is and how you deal with that. So that's a really important part for us to understand. So processes. If you have been around BCI for any length of time, you have heard us say processes, processes, processes. And that is true even as we're talking about dealing with difficult people, right? It's important that we understand that whatever we don't address, we are allowing. I think one of the best examples of this are firefighters. You know, every 6 months or so in our office, we have our community firefighters come through and they do checks, right? They are checking to make sure that our fire extinguisher is working. They're making sure that our smoke detectors have battery and that we are set. Because here is what they understand to the core of who they are. We are going to have problems. There are going to be times where they have to go fight a fire. But the better they do before the chaos or the situation happens at making sure all of their processes are in place, the less chaotic and less dangerous the situation will be. They get that to the core of who they are, and that's why they do checks, right? I can guarantee at the schools and things like that, in public places, everyone has processes in place to make sure that when a situation arises, they're able to deal with it, so that while there's going to be a problem from time to time, having your processes in place will minimize the chaos. And that's what we're trying to do. So whatever we don't address in a situation, before the situation begins, we are allowing. I think that's so important for us to understand as owners and managers of these companies. Okay, so let's talk about processes for employees. There are three I want to talk about specifically. First is an employee review. I think one of the best ways that you can get ahead of dealing with difficult with difficult employees, excuse me, is by making sure we have annual or biannual, at least 6 months reviews for employees. An employee review should never be a time where you are bringing up something terrible an employee did for the first time. Let's say something happened about 4 months ago and the employee's just now hearing about that. That is not the time. But an employee review is simply a time for you to have conversation and get ahead of any fires that may come up, right? This gives us the ability to have those conversations we need to have before issues arise. It gives us the ability to be the firefighter in this situation and just get in front of issues. So employee reviews, there should be nothing in there that's a surprise, but it's a great way to have a formal conversation with your employees about anything that you need to know about. Second, an employee handbook. I think this is your biggest firefighting tool that you have at your disposal at any time. Because here's the deal. When you have an employee handbook, you lay out policies and procedures and help employees understand what is expected of them at any point in time. If you don't have an employee handbook, we have them in our dealer toolbox. So check that out if you don't have one, but we have one specifically for dealerships in our dealer toolbox on our website. So a handbook also is going to give you the steps in there. It's going to be laid out on how you're going to address negative behavior or terrible behavior, because it is important for us to have this process in place of our employees understanding the process that we go through so that it's not a surprise. None of this should be a surprise to an employee as we're having conversations. And I just said that, addressing negative behavior, that should be lined out in the employee handbook, but we have to, as owners and managers, address negative behavior as it begins, right? We are not going to let this escalate and grow. I mean, it goes back to this thought, whatever we don't address, we're allowing. And that is vitally important. All right, so those are three, I mean, there's lots of processes you can have in place with your employees as you're talking about how to get ahead of issues, but those are just three easy ones that I would encourage you today after this webinar to make sure you have these three in place. Okay, so processes with your customers. I think this little picture on the side is so funny. We didn't find it in a dealership, thank goodness, because that would be a whole different conversation, but it says, don't complain, we don't care. That is not the way to treat your customers, and it will only add fuel to the fire if that is something you have up. Because here's the deal. With customers, I think one of the biggest issues that causes a customer to have a difficult situation presented is lack of communication. I was at the GIE Expo just a few weeks ago, and I asked this question. I said, how many of you have had more than 2 weeks go by in your service department without contacting a customer? And there were multiple hands that went up. If I left a piece of a product I had, or my car, or a piece of equipment somewhere, and I hadn't heard back for 2 weeks, I would be frustrated. I'm sure you would be too. So it's important that we have a communication process in place. And we need to not only communicate every step of that with our customers. So, in our shops, we always encourage that within 24 hours that a piece of equipment is looked at and then a customer is communicated with. But beyond that, it's important to let the customer know that you can't just say, oh, we're going to get back to you soon. Like, soon is not a definite time frame. There's going to be frustration. To you, soon may be 24 hours. Like, that may be moving and grooving. But to your customer, they may say, well, by the end of the day is soon to me. If you are not communicating clearly on what the customer can expect, then you're going to run into issues. It's as simple as that. So you have to have a process for communicating with your customers. You've got to have a process for communication with your employees on how to communicate with your customers, right? That seems a little silly, but as we're talking about this, there needs to be conversations with your employees. I would encourage you at least once a week to sit down or have a conversation with your employees and say, here are the things that we are needing to be more clear in communicating with our customers with. All right, and come up with the process and make sure they are understanding of that as well. Pay attention to time frames. We talked about that just a minute ago, but I think one of the most frustrating things for customers and employees is not having clear time frames when it comes to communication and processes. Right, so let's say someone comes up to your parts counter and they need a piece of equipment and they say, okay, I need this equipment. You said, okay, we can special or emergency order this for you and you will have it in your hand. We'll have it in the store in 2 days, right, or overnight, whatever that is for you. And then nobody calls the customer. They've already prepaid, they've already paid the freight, but then nobody on your team calls the customer. Sure, I would be upset too, right? It's important that we are so clear on this. And third, we don't want to oversell our products or services and have a process in place for that. If you have a preferred customer program, it's important that everyone is clear on the processes with that and how you're going to implement that on a regular basis. So I would say with customers, the most important processes you can have in place have to do with communication. All right? So let's talk about for just a second why situations escalate. So I personally, I've thought about this a lot, but if I could have any feature to Google Maps, it would be a feature that tells me how long it would take to get anywhere with my kids in the car. Like if you have gone anywhere with children, you know that it takes, it feels like 500 times longer to get anywhere with them. So last Christmas, my husband and I decided that we were gonna go on an impromptu road trip with our 3 kids. Great. Like this sounded so good in theory. So we have 2 5-year-olds, 5-year-old twins, and then we have a 1-year-old. Right? So we are just asking for it at this point. And we decide that we are going to put ourselves in the car on Christmas night and drive from Kansas City, Missouri to Galveston, Texas. And Google Maps told me, it lied to me, but it told me that it was going to take us 11 hours to get there. 11 hours. I said, that's not too bad. We'll leave at night and we'll just drive through the night while the kids sleep. It's going to be really great. We'll get there. It'll be perfect. Everybody will be excited, energized, ready to go. Here's what happened. It took 17 hours. Google Maps lied to us. It lied big time. And if I would have known it would have taken 17 hours there and 17 hours back, this story may have not even started. But we got in the car, drove ourselves and our children from Kansas City to Galveston, Texas, and we had a lovely time. The beach was wonderful. My kids had a great time. It was just fabulous until TripAdvisor came in. Right? Like, have you ever had a bad experience with TripAdvisor? Because this was it for us. It said, when you're in Galveston, here are the 10 things you should do. One of the things, it said, go on the ferry. It's a free ferry, and it'll take you from Galveston to Port Bolivar, I believe it was. So my husband said, all right, let's all get in the car. We're going on the ferry. Maybe we'll see a dolphin, right? My 5-year-olds were so excited about this possibility, and, it was all fine and well. We get on the ferry and we get out of our car. We turn off our car and we get out of our car. We go look and it's such a lovely time, whatever. It takes about 10 minutes to get from one side to the other and we get back in our car. Great little trip, and we were excited to go to this other Port Bolivar area and drive around. Well, we get in our car and my husband goes to start the car. My car won't start. Like literally my car won't start. It drove us all the way from Kansas City to Galveston with no issues. And then, of course, we are on the front line of the ferry, and it won't start. Okay, so I say, okay, well, fix it. Like, come on, let's fix it. And these ferries are on a time frame. So they're like, all right, let's keep moving. We got to keep the traffic flowing and everybody moving. So we couldn't get the car started. So there's me, my husband, and my 3 babies in the back seat. And 5 grown men come and have to push my car off the ferry over into a parking lot on the side. I was mortified. I also was freaking out because I was convinced I was stuck in Galveston forever with my babies. So we get over there, terrified, and then all of course, what happens next? We got 3 young kids. They go, Mom, we have to go to the bathroom. We're stuck on the side of an island with no mechanics, no shop, and a car that's not working, and now my kids have to go to the bathroom. I look at my husband, who's a pastor, which is important to know in this situation, right? There's not a whole lot of cussing that goes on in our house, but I look at him, well, eyes wide open, and I say, honey, mama's gonna lose her shit, right? Like, I was at this point where I was just about to lose it. Because when a situation escalates, it's not just one thing in a situation that gets to this escalation point. There are so many factors. And so let's break down each of these factors as I got to this lose it point of a situation. Right, so here are the 5 factors. We've got emotions, expectations, the situation was unexpected, and it was exaggerated. All right, so those are the things we're gonna break down and how my situation got to this lose it point. All right, so our emotions. It doesn't matter what happened. It's how the person feels about the situation, right? In my situation, it didn't matter that it was my car broke down. What mattered was that I felt embarrassed, I was afraid, and then my kids had to go to the bathroom. Awesome. So when you have someone who is at this lose it point with a situation, instead of focusing on the situation, you've got to focus on the emotions of your customer or your employee, right? So instead of focusing only on the situation of what happened, you have to focus on the emotions, right? So as an owner or manager, this is probably not our first response when we're dealing with someone who is a difficult person to deal with, right? We're just trying to focus on the situation and how to deal with that, but we've got to focus on the emotions. So that's the first part. That's the first part of why situations escalate. Doesn't matter what happened, but it's how the person feels about that situation. Next, our expectations. When something doesn't meet your expectations, the situation simply gets worse. It's this whole idea with the Big Mac, as you see over there on the side, right? Here's what McDonald's promises, and here's what they actually deliver, right? When our expectations are not met, the situation gets worse. So for me in my situation, my expectation, however unrealistic it is, was that my husband should have been able to fix my car on the ferry with no tools, no time, and no resources, right? Like, that was my expectation of the situation and how it should have been handled. It was not met. Like, after the fact, I understand how unrealistic it was, but in the moment, that was my expectation. So, as you're dealing with your customers or an employee who is at this lose it moment, it's your job to set realistic expectations. When you're communicating your next steps, be sure to only promise what you know that can be done. Don't overpromise, and make sure they understand timeframes, right? Like, it's so vitally important that the expectations are set properly, because it's not just one thing that makes the situation come to this lose it moment, but it's all of these things combined. All right, and unexpected. When a situation is unexpected, it continues to escalate. So as in our situation, obviously I was not expecting for my car to die on the ferry in the middle of the water. Like, that's terrible. Obviously that's not expected, you know. And then as we call the tow company to come help us figure this out, they said, well, you know, we don't have any mechanics or tow trucks on this side of this Port Bolivar, so we're going to have to send them over on the ferry, right? The unexpected things kept coming and coming and coming, and it made the situation worse because I wasn't sure what to expect next. So it's your job to make sure that you work to provide a no more surprise solution, right? You need to make sure that everything is communicated clearly, properly, and promptly. Did you get that? Clearly, we're making sure that our customer knows every single part of this next step. Promptly, we want to make sure that it's brought up to their attention right away. All right, so it's important for us to understand that when a situation is unexpected, it continues to escalate. You know, we always joke in our office. We have Jeff Blackton, who is in charge of our dealer success groups. And Jeff is a person who doesn't have just a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. He's all the way out to plan X, Y, Z. Like, he legitimately carries kitty litter in his truck for an emergency, which, I mean, look, good for him, but he doesn't have a cat. Like, he is at the point where he always has all of the things you could possibly need at any given situation. So if a situation came to Jeff and it was unexpected, it would have so much weight on him if he wasn't able to deal with it for it to be unexpected for him, and it would escalate the situation. So it's so important for us to understand this. All right, when a situation becomes personal, it continues to escalate, right? So when people you care about are involved, the situation becomes personal. For me, it was the fact that I had my husband and my babies in this car, and I was just convinced that my job as a mama bear in this situation was being taken into attack, right? So it was incredibly personal to me. So it's important as an owner or manager to make sure you're acknowledging the personal aspect of your customer situation by using phrases like, you know, if I were in your situation, I would feel that way too. That will help ease the situation. But it's important to understand and acknowledge with your customer or your employee that the personal aspect of that situation, because that is always a component of it when it gets to this lose it moment. All right, and then the situation gets exaggerated. You know, we've always seen these people who sit here and they go, oh, I caught a fish this big, when it's just a tiny little fish, right? We all probably know people like that. But when we blow a situation up in our minds beyond the reality of the event, it continues to escalate. So in my situation with our car, we got it off the ferry, and I came to the conclusion that since this was a road trip, we would be stuck in Galveston forever. Right? There was no way we were going to be able to make it back home, and we were just going to be stuck there forever. Like, I called my mom and dad on the phone after this, and I was like, Mom, I don't know what to do. I can't figure out how to do this. I was so at this point of extreme escalation with this situation that I could not think clearly. And I think it's so important for us to understand that. So your job in a situation that's getting exaggerated is to help a customer deflate the situation. Help them see and bring it down to the ridiculous, how the situation is not going to ruin their life, right? So as I called my mom and my dad, they said, okay, like, Sarah, you're not gonna be stuck in Galveston forever. Great news, there are airports, there are rental car companies, and there is a shop you could take your car to have it fixed. Okay, so that is so important for us to do, to say, all right, here, I know that in this situation, it's so much bigger than what you're thinking, but here are ways we can deflate the situation together with the customer. So how do you do this, right? How do you de-escalate this situation? As you go through psychology and understand psychology and human behavior, there's this thing that I've stumbled upon, and I think it's so fascinating. It's the fact that when you are in a stressful situation and you are at this lose it point, the only part of your brain that is functioning at that time is the same part of your brain that a dog has. All right, let that sink in for just a second. You have a customer who comes up to your counter and they are furious about something, right? We just went through these 5 reasons why they may be furious and how these all come together. It's never just one thing, but they come up to the counter furious. And so we have to understand that they are not thinking logically. And you at the parts counter or in whatever situation you're in, you can't sit there and say, well, let me tell you, well, what you're thinking is not clear, right? It is not, it's so much more than just the logic of the situation. There is the emotion. There are all these other things that we're talking about. So it's so vitally important for us to understand that they are not even using all of their brain. Like, your brain literally only turns on the part of the brain that a dog has when you get into a situation that is stressful and you get to this lose it moment with it. Isn't that crazy? Like, so think about it this way. If you are an owner or manager and you get into a situation with a customer and you both get to the lose it moment, like, how is that going to work? Have you seen 2 dogs just fight before? It doesn't turn out pretty. Somebody has to take control of that situation, and that is your job as an owner or manager, right? That is your job. So how do we do this? I mean, I touched on this just a second ago, but you are the director of the situation. It's your job as an owner or manager to come up with a solution of how you want to see this play out, right? And you're only responsible for your own actions. I was listening to this ex-chief of police give this conversation about how he dealt with hostile situations. And what he said over and over and over again is that if you get upset, you lose. Like, your job as the director of this situation is to stay calm, is to stay level-headed, and to be the one who is communicating clearly and effectively with everyone else involved in the situation. So you obviously cannot control the other person, right? They are only responsible for their actions and you are for yours, but you cannot get upset. And I think that's so important, whether you're dealing with your employees or you're dealing with customers. If you get upset, you lose in this situation. So that's super important for us to understand. So you've got to have a plan in place. Like any coach or director, you've got to have a plan that you're going to use. This plan should not be developed on the fly. You should have specific steps in place so that you can deal with a situation as it arises. So let's say you have a customer who comes up to your parts counter and is furious. What do you do as an owner or manager in this situation? I have 4 suggestions. So first, your first thing that you're going to want to do is project calmness. I want you to get a legal pad or a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to come into this situation and say, help me understand what happened. I'm going to take some notes. If you're in a situation that is at this lose it point, it's moving fast, right? Like, there are words being shouted, there are all of these things happening, but it's your job as the director to project calmness in the situation. Remember, if you get upset, you lose. So we have a notepad, we have a pen, and we are taking notes on what's going on, right? Number 1, it shows that we care about what happened with the situation, right? If somebody says, you know what, I'm going to take notes on this, it indicates that they care about what happened. Second, it slows the situation down. Even if you're writing as fast as you possibly can, you can't talk and write the same speed that they're talking at that point, right? You can't write at the same speed that someone who's upset is talking. So it slows the situation down. So that's the first thing I would encourage you to do. Have a plan to have a legal pad somewhere you can grab and a pen and say, let me take some notes on this. That will project calmness and physically slow the situation down. Coagonize, right? So what this means is that you say, you have a customer at the parts counter who's so upset, and you say, you know what? If I were in your shoes, I would feel the same way too. If that happened to me, I would be upset too. We're on the same team. We want the same results, right? We want them to walk out of your dealership. You know, they're probably not going to be happy if they come in and they're at this lose-it moment, but we can do the best we can to make sure that they leave feeling like we've reached a solution. That's number 2. So we're going to coagonize. If I was in your shoes, I would feel upset too. I would feel the same way you feel. If I wasn't communicated with because we special ordered this part and then you weren't communicated with for a week after and you needed it, I would be upset too. Whatever it is, you need to be sure that you are coagonizing with your customer. The next thing we're doing is acknowledging their feelings, right? Like, this is a funny one because I think, you know, they go, oh, well, I hate this dealership and I never want to do this with you again, like work with you ever again. Like, you know, one of the ways that you can deal with this is say, you know what, I've heard that a lot. Like, and we're working on fixing that, right? But saying something that throws them off balance a little bit will help change the scenario of the situation. You know, I've heard some of the guys joke, they say, well, I just think you're, they've had some people say, oh, I just think you're fat, ugly, and you're not smart. And they go, you know what, I've heard that before too. I've heard that before too. So it's important that you acknowledge their feelings and kind of throw it back at them. It will throw them off balance and they say, oh, well, that's not really what I meant, right? It gets them to move to this mind frame that's not this just lose it. The last thing that I would encourage you to do and have a plan in place to do is move physically to a neutral location. right? We are not going to have these conversations in the middle of our showroom, in front of our parts department. No, we need to physically move to a neutral location that will make it an effective place to have a conversation. Because here's the thing, when we can physically move somebody out of the stance that they're in, put a cup of coffee in their hand. I mean, like, I guess if it's a really serious situation, you probably don't want to put a cup of steaming hot coffee in their hand. It could get really ugly. But get their body language to change, right? Move them to a neutral location where you can have a conversation with them. That is one of the most important things that you can do as an owner or manager in this situation. Okay, so last but not least, the last thing I want to talk about is how do you have this conversation, right? The first thing you're going to do with a customer or an employee when you have a difficult situation pop up is you're going to establish your credibility. You want to say, I'm here and I want to help you. I'm here and we're going to get to the bottom of the situation together. You've got to establish your credibility. Hi, I'm Sarah and I'm the owner here. I want to help, right? Help them understand who you are and what you're going to try to do. You're trying to help them. Next, you're going to give them, you're going to ask for context. You're going to say, do me a favor and help me understand what happened, right? This is when we have our notepad out, our paper, our legal pad, and we're writing this down and say, I'm going to take a few notes on this, but do me a favor and help me understand what happened. As they're talking through this, a lot of times they'll de-escalate the situation for you, and they go, oh, well, so I ordered my part, and I had paid for overnight shipping, and it came in, and nobody called me, right? Like, nobody called me. So that's why I'm upset. That's what happened. So when you get context, it makes everything come together. The third thing you're going to ask is you're going to say, so in your mind, what would make this right for you? By asking this question, it gives you a place to start having conversations on how to fix the situation. And that's important. If we want to end this conversation, at least neutral with a customer and employee, we have to come to this place of resolving it. So we're going to say credibility, I'm here and I want to help. You're going to do context. Do me a favor and tell me and help me understand what happened. And then you're going to say, so in your mind, what would make this right for you? Again, I said in the last slide, this is not something that we're going to do on the fly for the first time when we have an angry customer in front of us. No, in those moments, we go into our fight, flight, or freeze responses that we talked about earlier. So what you've got to do in order to combat that is you've got to practice. You've got to practice and practice and practice. Sure, are you gonna look a little crazy as you go up to the parts counter with your parts people and say, all right, I want you to act like a crazy customer for me, right? Or you go say, oh, I want you to act like a crazy employee. Hey, that may not be a far stretch for some of the people you ask, right? But it's important that you practice this so that when a customer or an employee comes with a situation, you are in charge. You're the one who keeps control of the situation, and that you're not getting upset, because what we said is the truth, right? If you get upset in these situations, then you'll lose. So, all right, well, very good. I'm open for questions now. I'd love to answer any questions that anyone has.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, we did have a couple questions come in. But one thing that was occurring to me as you were going through that your slide and the processes for de-escalating situations, you could probably follow those exact same steps in the electronic world, in the digital age here. People get a lot of negative feedback on Facebook, and you see companies like trying to fight things out with customers in the digital space, and that just seems to be a losing proposition.
You're exactly right, Michael. It's a direct a crossover. And, even as our dealers and things have issues, people write bad Yelp reviews about them or things, understanding that typically it's not just this one piece that has made this happen, but understanding how to de-escalate that and make a resolution for that is so vitally important in this digital age.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's some of the questions that have come in. How would you recommend dealing with an employee, or I suppose a customer for that matter, who thinks they know everything?
I think that's funny because I think a lot of times we deal with this. But there comes, we always say in management, you can either change the people or you can change the people. It goes back to this thought that whatever we're not addressing, we're allowing. So that if you are allowing a customer to, or employee, this question is about employees specifically, if you allow an employee to come in and act like he owns the place and that he knows everything, you are allowing that because you haven't addressed up to this point. So I think that there are lots of conversations that need to take place, and it's your job as an owner or manager to decide, are you going to put the time, energy, and effort into changing the employee's behavior so that they're able to work with other people and work with you? Or are you going to change the employee? And that's something that you have to decide on a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely. I have to ask this one because I learned something. I actually had to look something up in this question. How would you recommend best dealing with the digital native versus the digital immigrant conflict within your company? Now, I didn't know what that meant. Maybe you do, but it's basically talking about the generation gap between the pre-digital age folks and the post-digital age folks.
Sure. Well, I think there's a few different ways that you can look at that, Michael. I think one of them is just by making sure that there are good conversations that are happening. We encourage every dealership that we work with to make sure that there are meetings that are happening. We encourage even like a 15 or 20-minute meeting with your whole team on a weekly basis to make sure that people are moving down the same path together, right? As an owner or a manager, your job is to cast this vision and keep people moving in the right direction. And one of the things that you have to address is this generation gap because it's there. And I read a statistic the other day, Michael, that I think in the next like 3 years, there are going to be 4 or 5 different generations working together at the same time. And so it's so important that we are having these conversations. But I think that's part of it. It's, number one, processes. Make sure that if the issue, there's so many different parts to this, but if the issue is like employees using their cell phones when they're not supposed to, make sure you have that written out in your employee handbook. Your employee handbook can solve so many issues that you have by just making sure those things are in place.
Well, and to that point, you and Bob and the rest of the team are out and about quite a bit. The employee handbook is pretty critical, but how widespread are they in practice? What are your experiences?
I would say, over the companies that we work with all pretty much have one in place. If people have our dealer toolbox, which is a lot of people do, it's in there for free. You can just change your name and tweak some policies out. But the employee handbook, I would say probably 75% of the dealerships that we work with, and are starting to work with, do not have employee handbooks in place. Only 25% of them have employee handbooks. And so that's why we harp on this all the time, because your employee handbook is what your processes are for your HR and for your people. Like we talk about processes all the time, obviously. We're big believers in processes. But your employee handbook is what your processes are for HR. So I think it's important. But the majority of dealerships we work with and we consult with do not have employee handbooks in place.
Wow. All right, I think we've got time for at least one more here. What are some strategies to deal with a coworker who feels they must have 100% control of everything that happens in the dealership?
Well, my initial thought is bye, no. But again, I think that a lot of times having a third party involved in a conversation like that is important, but also making sure that roles and responsibilities are thought out and thought through and on paper and discussed. So many times conflict comes in dealerships or any environment or relationship because we have not clarified what our expectations are of someone. And so by saying, here is your job, stay in your lane, and I'm going to be taking care of this and staying in my lane, I think that can take care of a lot of conflict in general. But there comes times when sometimes you just got to get a third party involved and say, here, let's all go to a neutral location together. Maybe we all go out to lunch and let's talk about this. Because so many times if you are in the middle of your dealership or in your office or wherever it is, you're in this like weird area where it's not neutral. Like there are emotions in your charge, but if you go to a restaurant to say and have this conversation, you know, well, most of the time there's not gonna be yelling or screaming. You're gonna be able to have a conversation like grown-ups because you have moved physically to a neutral location. But don't be afraid to bring a third party in if you need to.
Okay. I think we're just about out of time here, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We appreciate you coming in this morning. And as I mentioned, the full presentation as well as the audio of Sarah's webinar this morning are going to be up on rurallifestyledealer.com. So you can circle back and review it or share it with your team if you want. And there's a couple of questions hanging out here that we'll send back with Sarah, and she can also answer those. We're going to send out an email notification once everything's up and live, so keep an eye on your email for that. On behalf of Sarah and our team here at Rural Lifestyle Dealer, as well as everyone at YANMAR, thanks very much for joining us today. When you leave, a short survey is going to pop up. Please let us know what you thought. And if you have any topics you'd like to see covered down the road, feel free to let us know. Thanks very much. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.